So today we're diving into a very, very deep topic, and that is clarity and how clarity is critical when it comes to fundraising. Having clarity about who you are as an organization, and more importantly, having clarity around the things that you're raising dollars for. So we're going to dive into that today. Lack of clarity actually drains your time, confuses your team, and can weaken your donor conversations. Clarity is the foundation of fundraising success. That's our focus. Let's huddle up. Hey, welcome to another episode of Huddle Up with Mark, the Fund Coach. I am Mark Duncan, and delighted to be with you once again. Thank you for those who are listening to this on the podcast platforms and watching this on YouTube. Greatly, greatly appreciate your support. So let's talk about clarity here. Clarity, first of all, it's not an option. It's not an option when it comes to fundraising. It is a prerequisite. And so you have to be clear on what you're raising dollars for and the impact that it's going to have on the people that you serve. Now, there are 3 red flags that you can display externally that signal that you think you're clear, but you really aren't. The first one is you really can't clearly state how much money you need and why. I can't tell you how many times I have conversations with people either thinking about working with me or just nonprofit leaders in general. And I ask the question, how much money do you need to raise this year? And sometimes they have to go and look. And I think I said this in the most previous episode. You should know what your dollar goal is, and you should know where you are against that dollar goal all the time. So if you don't know that, that is a red flag. The second red flag is that your board or your staff are giving different answers about fundraising goals. So you've got staff members over here talking about you needing to raise money for this initiative or this purpose. You have staff over here saying something totally different. That's a red flag, especially if they wind up saying that to the same group of people or the same person. That would not go over well. That is clearly a signal and a red flag that there's no clarity as it relates to fundraising. And sometimes this will happen. Donors will keep asking, what exactly do you need from me? Now, as I always talk about, when you're building relationships with people who have significant capacity, significant wealth, sometimes without you being ready, they'll ask you what you need. I always say, when you're going out on a visit, especially your first visit, don't ask on the first visit, but be ready. Having clarity allows you to be ready. So even though you're not going to ask on the first visit, if they ask you, how can I help? Tell them if you're clear. If you're not clear, you're going to wind up being hesitant when you're asked that question. And again, that is definitely, a red flag. So there are 4 things that you need to have clarity on when it comes to fundraising. These are key elements. The first is your financial goal. We just talked about that. You got to know how much you need to raise, by when, and for what purpose. So if you've heard me talk about any sort of fundraising initiative, fundraising campaign, Those are the three things that you must know: how much you need to raise, when you need to raise it by, and what's the purpose. And the when gives you that sense of urgency. But you need to have clarity around that, your financial goal. You have to have clarity around your fundraising priorities. What are the top 1 to 3 things that the money that you raise will make possible for the people that you serve? What are those top 1 to 3 things that this money will enable you to do? Have to be clear about that. The third thing is you have to understand your donor audience. Now, you can't know your donor audience in mass. I'm talking about the individuals who you know have capacity, that have the ability to give significant gifts to your organization. You need to know your audience individually. You need to know who cares most deeply about the priorities that you're raising money for. Because you certainly don't want to talk to Joe Smith about something programmatic when Joe Smith is more interested in endowment, or he's more interested in facilities, bricks and mortar. So you need to know your donors. You need to know your audience. You need to know who they are and what motivates them to support you. And then you have to have clarity around your plan of action. What are the key strategies, timelines? What are those things that you need to know and need to have in place to be able to secure those gifts? There has to be clarity around that plan of action. Especially as the dollars come in, you need to know when you're going to use those dollars. Are you going to use those dollars as soon as they come in? Are you going to wait for all the dollars to come in? Because those will be questions that you'll be asked. Because if your donor gives you a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 gift, they're going to know, when is this project going to be complete? And so if you're going to start it in phases, let them know you're starting it in phases. Keep them apprised of those phases while they're in progress. So you have to have clarity around your plan of action and be able to communicate that clearly to your major donors. Now, I've got a quick exercise for you. As you're listening or watching this, and I want you to do this with integrity. What I mean is, you can pause this audio or video to do this exercise, but do this with integrity. Be honest with yourself. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to imagine that I'm a donor and you have 90 seconds to tell me what $100,000 would do for your organization. Can you confidently answer that question right now? So take a moment, 90 seconds. Pull out your phones, pull out your watches, whatever you use to keep time. Set it for 90 seconds right now. And tell me, can you tell me what $100,000, if you received $100,000 gift, what you would use it for right now? Now, what donors look for is they want clarity. See, they give generously to clear and compelling, actionable visions, not vague wishes. Oh, if I had $100,000, maybe we could buy this piece of equipment, or maybe we could hire that person. And sidebar, if you wrote down right now, or as you were thinking about what your answer was going to be, if you mentioned hiring somebody, I'm going to tell you right now, a donor will say, well, $100,000 to hire someone. How are you going to sustain that? See, sometimes we aren't clear with ourselves and the repercussions of how we would quickly use that money. $100,000 that'll allow me to hire a person to do this or two people to do that. Well, great. What happens next year? Because if you think that that donor is going to give you $100,000 a year to fund salaries, you'd be sadly mistaken. You might get some that would be willing to do that, but not in perpetuity, right? You have to be able to show, if you are going to talk about $100,000 for a position, then you need to make the case for how you're going to sustain that position without an additional $100,000 gift year after year after year. If you can do that, great, right? Treat it like a grant, use it to launch, use the individual giving to sustain. And when I say individual giving, I'm talking about just increasing your philanthropy overall. Or if you're an organization that has a fee for service model and $100,000 investment in a new staff person is going to allow you to increase revenue, then that's the case you make. But you've got to have real clarity, around that. So those are three key elements that you must be clear on: your financial goal, your fundraising priorities, and I'm sorry, there are four things: your financial goal, your fundraising priorities, your your donor audience, and your plan of action. Gotta have clarity around that. Okay. And don't try to raise money for everything at once. Don't try to raise money for everything at once, especially if we're not talking about, now, if you're talking about a comprehensive campaign, yes. But if we're talking about a fundraising initiative, focus is what gets funded. So keep that in mind. Now, if you don't have clarity around your fundraising initiatives and your board's out there saying one thing and your staff's out there saying another, and you're paralyzed with confusion when a donor asks you how can they help, and you just freeze, you may need outside help, right? You may need outside help. So how do you recognize when you need outside help to get you where you need to be? Now, when I'm talking about outside help, I'm talking about perhaps a coach or a consultant or a facilitator, those kinds of things, right? You don't have to do this alone. You really don't. You may need to call for reinforcements. So if you've been working on a campaign or a major gift strategy and it's just not going anywhere, or your board leadership um, can't seem to align on fundraising priorities, you're having sort of these internal conversations that seem to be going nowhere, you're stuck identifying or reaching out to high capacity donors. You know who they are, but you don't know what to say when you call them or when you email them or when you reach out to them, right? You don't know what to say. You're stuck. You're overthinking and you're overwhelmed, or you're unsure about what the next steps are. If that's you, these are the types of things that you want to consider in the form of help. First, obviously, one on one coaching, probably the most effective way to achieve the goals that you want to achieve when you have somebody who is teaching you and holding you accountable, right? So, one on one coaching, very similar to what I offer. Peer learning communities are also helpful too. And I'm actually launching a community like that very soon. So stay tuned for that. And there's also things like strategic consulting or facilitated board retreats, workshops, or short-term trainings, right? These are all things that you can avail yourself of so that you can become unstuck and move forward. There's one key point here though. Outside help brings objectivity, it brings structure, it brings accountability and speed. And it's not a crutch, right? It's a catalyst. It's a catalyst for you to be able to advance forward. Now, obviously, when we think about this, and I'm talking to you about getting outside help, you know, you're thinking about the cost. I get it. I get it. But the power in asking for help is critical. There is such power in it. Leaders ask for help. Stuck leaders pretend they don't need it. Let me say that again. Leaders ask for help. Stuck leaders pretend that they don't need it. Now, I've personally hired coaches throughout my career. In fact, there's a story I tell about the very first coach I ever had, which goes back to, well, I met him in the very late 80s, early in my nonprofit career. And he was the one who got me to focus because in my early part of my nonprofit career, I was on the programmatic side. And then I landed a position as a program director. But my interest in fundraising was piqued during my role as a program director simply because my boss at the time said, well, we're going to do a capital campaign. And I looked at him, I said, what's a capital campaign? I had no idea. And of course, he said, well, we're going to go out, we're going to raise $1.2 million. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And we're going to go out and talk to people and ask them for money. And when I heard that, I was absolutely intrigued. My interest was piqued. And at that time, I was already working with a coach who was helping me define my direction. And when I shared with my coach that, oh, this fundraising, this is something I want to do, and the rest is history. That conversation took place in 1996. Less than 2 years later, I was an executive director of a nonprofit organization engaging directly in fundraising. And it goes on and on. I wouldn't have been able to be here without help, without a coach. And since I've been coaching, I've hired coaches. You see, if you want to advance, if you want to get unstuck, sometimes you need the help to push you over the next obstacle, to help you push that obstacle aside, or maybe help you realize that the obstacle isn't even there because it's something that you've conjured up. So it's important. So you're not failing if you ask for help. You're investing in clarity and confidence. And donors can sense Trust me, they can sense when you're clear and when you're confident, because that is what inspires them to invest generously. See, this is how important your role is as a nonprofit leader. Having that clarity, having that confidence in terms of the direction that your organization is going in, and having clarity around what those needs are, and being confident to share those needs when asked to do so, to share what those are. Very, very critical. So get clear, get very, very clear on your goal, dollar goal, your priorities, your audience, and your plan. Get super clear on it. And recognize when spinning your wheels means it's time to get help. Now, if you want to learn more about my services, the offer that I make to you at the end of each episode, go to my website, go to thefundcoach.com. In the upper right hand corner, you'll see a green button, and you can schedule time to chat with me if you want to talk about getting help from me. But if not me, get help somewhere. Decide on what you need and seek it out. Hope this is helpful to you. And as always, this fundraising thing that we do, the clarity that we have to have around it, the uh, congruency within staff and volunteer leadership, your board, all of that, right? All of that is why we do this primarily, and in many cases solely, right? This fundraising thing is not about the dollars, but it's about what the dollars do for the people that you serve. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.